Hi, and a warm welcome to Startup Grind Stockholm, Kristina. Really happy that you could join us today for this fireside chat.
Thank you. I'm really excited, Naimul, and I love what you say about pursuing your dreams. I think ultimately that's what it's all about, but there are bumps on the road.
Yeah, bumps can come anytime on the road. And Kristina, I was thinking that we maybe start a little bit with, so for our community, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself. We start there, your own background, education, and however you want to take that question.
Absolutely. Thank you. I kind of call myself a bit of a hybrid. I'm part Scottish, part Swedish, lived in Stockholm on and off now since 2012, and have a background of, 25 years in communications. I studied German, French, law and economics a long time ago, and did a master in public relations and business communications in The Hague. And pretty much been working between Amsterdam and Stockholm ever since. And some of the brands I've been honoured to serve have been Heineken, Ahold, Royal Ahold, Symantec, UPC, Just Eat Takeaway, Delaval, Tetra Laval, Telia Sonera, and obviously now Voi. You're on mute.
Very interesting journey so far. And what's the core? So you've worked with brands, like several brands in several different categories. What kind of are the challenges similar in different categories, or do different categories pose different challenges for brands?
I think at the end of the day, it's about filling a need, and a brand should give a face to a solution to that need. And most spaces are highly competitive. So how do you then stand out? And I think their communications you have communications marketing and comms as part of marketing, or vice versa. And I believe very much in the strength of communication in storytelling, and have done very much since day one. And I think if you have a compelling vision, a compelling idea, and a solution, you will get traction. And it's always important, regardless of the brand, is that you always have an outside-in perspective. And sometimes you drill down too much you're very inwardly focused. Yeah, you might have a great product, but if you can't kind of get your messaging out there that product is appealing to your target audience, it's pointless. Nobody will know, and then somebody else will come up with that second solution and do it bigger and better. So, I've always felt, and pretty much started out on that, even in the early days, is try and stand for something. One thing on my own background, I've always seen myself part activist. And in today's world, more than ever, it's important that we are passionate about what we do, because then that comes across in all your messaging, in your branding. If you believe in it, if you want to go that extra mile, clearly there needs to be a market, there needs to be money behind it. However, it cannot only be that. And I think that shines through. And I'm happy that I've seen a shift the last 25 years working in communications, that more and more it is important. And certainly younger generation really are passionate about sustainable solutions and making that right impact. And the official terminology is really called corporate citizenship. A company needs to have, what's your contribution to community? How can you help out? And of course, you're not an NGO, you need to be commercially viable, but still I think comms can be a lot in appealing to people and trying to create platforms, communities. So together you create solutions. Today's technology and social media, it has gotten a lot easier than like 20 years ago. So it was one-way communications a lot. Now it's you have no control over the messaging. You facilitate the messaging and you connect the dots. That's kind of how I see it.
Lots of interesting themes coming out just in those couple of minutes. For our audience, just to structure it a bit, you made a very interesting point: stand for something. So I think that has to be, you have to have a base if as a startup, if we try to take that discussion there. And then you talked three very interesting concepts in startup space as well, which is have a compelling idea. That we always say to startups: start with an idea, have an outside-in perspective that you were saying, and then you kind of juggled around the entire marketing and silos and all that into storytelling, like when you talked about that. So I think really, really good insight over there for all our listeners here. And then you mentioned a very interesting point on activists. I was actually yesterday writing a blog on how businesses change from businesses to entrepreneurship, and then 10 to 15 years ago, change makers, and now every entrepreneur needs to be an activist. Without that, it's very difficult to build your brand. Great discussions over there. Kristina, tell me a little bit about if we go into Voi's own journey as a startup. How did it start? Do you want to share something with us on that?
Yes, absolutely. I'll just kind of set the scene. I'll share a few slides on the story of Voi just right now, and then I'll go back to stop sharing. But let me just go into, this was my background. And maybe before I do that, to kind of show why did I choose Voi? It's close to 3 years, so it was in the early days. And I felt it was a company that had the possibility to create true change. I want to be on the right side of history. And there's a passionate group of committed people. And that for me stood out. It was a smaller company then. And together we create brilliance. And I think that's why they're very empowering. We see ourselves as trailblazers. And there's also great market opportunity when you talk about micro-mobility and sich. So just a few numbers on the voyage so far, and it started out in June, and here you can kind of see how we've grown on several fronts. Last week we had great news. It was Great Friday for us. We re-won our tender in Marseille, which was fantastic because that was one of the first cities in Europe to have an official tender, and now we have re-won it again, and that really shows the trust the city has in us. In the summer months, we were up 2 million weekly rides across our 70 plus cities. Here you have also on sustainability, which is a hugely important pillar for us, but also an often misunderstood pillar when it comes to e-scooters. If you look at this kind of backdrop, you can see a lot of first. We've been bold. We always have been bold from day one. We do dare to take calculated risk. And that's one thing also I find for myself. I'm a risk taker, of course, calculated risks. I think that's important to highlight and to stand for what you do. And one thing we did pretty much from day one, and that was there before I joined, is Voi has a vision. The vision is a simple but very important one, is creating cities for living, free of noise and pollution. Now that vision, I've worked at companies, maybe 100-year-old companies, and still grappling, what is our vision? And they keep changing it, and you get very smart brand agency people come in, charge a fortune, oh, we'll change it all, we'll change the values, but the essence of the company has gone. So when you start out a company, and I have a strong passion for startups because it's the brilliance there, make sure you have your vision from day one. That would be my advice. Do not treat that as an afterthought, but you treat it as, it's like building a house. It's the basis of your house, is that vision. Because when there are turbulent times, and as I always say, change is the only constant, that's when your vision will be the glue. It'll be, inherent to the company, regardless how you structure the company and you grow or maybe downsize. Your vision will be what makes you stand out and create the kind of red thread in your storytelling and in how you live and survive in the company. So that's really a bit there. And I think here some numbers about Voi. Founded 2018, we're across 70 cities. We actually launched in Brussels only last month, which was nice. And we have no gig workers, 6 million users, and nearly 1,000 employees now. So these are just some numbers that I think is relevant just to set the scene about Voi. And there, the vision that I've mentioned, we also have a mission, but the vision has been the one that's been there, kind of has stood very strong with Voi. And then I'll come back to that one later. But yeah, so that's really a bit about Voi. Micromobility industry is in its infancy phase in this kind of company, but I guess that's probably the case for most startups. There is often no blueprint. You are setting out on something that's not been charted before. So by default, you need to be able to cope with that X factor, and then having strong storyteller will help you navigate your way forward in the kind of unknown stage. And if you look at the micromobility industry, Voi was the first in Europe. I think Lime came a day or two around that in Paris. And ever since then, we've been setting the stage and changing perceptions and pushing forward. And that's been very important. And now, as we see it, another important, we kind of started a lot on that last year. And that's what we call, on part of our storytelling, is the 15-minute city, because it is important also as a startup that you create a solution. You cannot be defending yourself at all times. Yes, we know we need to sort out more when it comes to parking. We have fixed lifespan. We used to have a few months with our scooters, and now 5+ years. But in addition, ultimately, if we go back to our vision, creating cities for living, an enabler is the 15-minute city. And that's what we've really jumped on now, when we want to liberate city dwellers from cars, but they still have a right to get around. We also want to reimagine how our streets are looking. And for that, we feel that we are part of that solution, and we want to reinvent urban areas and create bold partnerships in that. And I have a few slides here that I wanted to show on the 15-minute city. We, together with an architect firm, have created how some cities can look if we reimagine them and actually get cars out of the equation, not only qua carbon CO2 emissions, but also the space they take by parking. So this whole micromobility is a trigger in that. And one important one here is, for example, Stockholm, our hometown. This is the most polluted street in Stockholm, Hornstor. But if we reimagine how we think cities should look, you can see from where it was in the top right corner to where it is now, that this is like a transport hub, by creating different modes of transport, you no longer have the need to have a car parked in front of a house, taking up space. So I kind of think this is also important when you're thinking about your own journey with a startup. Where are you creating solving a problem today, but also tomorrow, your vision to kind of inspire your stakeholders as well, and not only be product only focused, because that is very kind of, I would say, short term too, because it helps to have a bigger look at it to be more compelling. If that kind of makes sense, Naimul. And I think that was that part there.
Yes. Okay. Kristina, very interesting discussion so far. So I'm just trying to kind of build all this together. You started discussing the Voi journey, which I think this is explosive level growth, like from 2018 to 2021 in 3 years. You went from 0 to 1,000 employees, from 0 to 6 million users. Now that's huge. I think that's one part which we need to come back to.
Yeah.
Second thing, you have more slides, Kristina, you want to take?
Well, I think that was, then I wanted to also talk about an important leg, was safety. It's vision zero, and it's about educating users. I think there, and then sustainability I've touched on. That was pretty much it, those ones there.
Okay. Yeah. Brilliant. So I think we can, so one point that I've noted here, we'll try to go into the journey itself for Voi, like from 2018, like which you say 1,000 employees, 6 million users. How did Voi do it? Like, was branding or communication a core part of it, or you think was it ancillary and it was really the product? Just wondering, like, what could be the key driver for such?
I think one of them key is clearly we have a fleet on the street. So that is our brand there. People see it, they love it or loathe it. But that kind of, you're there and people are curious. And then by having a superior technology behind it and accessibility, because that's what it's about. You need to have your scooters at the right place, that people, they bake it into their daily life. And I think that's what was one reason, and the timing of it, and the our agility to act fast. I mean, the first 6 months, I mean, we started out in 5, 10, 15, and then in the spring of 2019, we added another 30 cities, 40 cities, and you started to create this kind of growth cycle. But let's not forget, last year was Corona. We then actually, back in March 2020, we then paused, because when people stopped moving, you didn't need service. So we paused in many cities, and unfortunately also had to let 20% of our staff go. And then when people started to ease out again, then in June, July, we switched on our cities again.
Mhm.
And then we had a hockey stick effect because people also did not want to go into crowded buses. So you had that all of a sudden we opened up wider. Now we do work very closely with public transport. And now,
Okay.
so we are a first and last mile. But at the end of the day, people need to change their behaviorism. And that was a real kind of unleashing moment that they then thought, oh, I'm going to give it a try. And then it was stickiness. And it's also important, the different price models that you offer to people and your storytelling around your solutions so that people are aware of you. But clearly in our case, we do actually have a physical product, which is also makes it very visible to also your non-customer.
Okay. So product is you're thinking it's a core factor for the brand's explosive growth, but also probably has to do something with how the startup organization works. Like imagine a stable company which grows 5-10% year on year, as opposed to a company that goes from 0 to 6 million user base. What is the environment like? Like when you are in that? Yeah.
I mean, the environment is high energy.
Okay.
Really, it's can-do attitude. And I had a learning, certainly when I worked for Takeaway or Just Eat Takeaway. Now, I learned that was the first time I kind of got the vibe with the kind of environment. I just learned, okay, jump in the pool, you're going to swim. So you need to kind of trust yourself and go for it. And that's that kind of environment, because if you wait too long, it becomes, the mountain becomes too big to climb. So it's can-do attitude, conviction, commitment, and consistency as well. Certainly when it comes to storytelling and branding, you need to have trust. It's all about trust. So if you need to convey that element of trust, and you do that by consistency and transparency as well. So, but the vibe, it's kind of can do and go get, and the sky's the limit, but with a very grounded ability and also huge amount of teamwork. I mean, everybody's in it to win it.
Okay. So you mentioned high energy and significant momentum when you're building a startup. Well, on the other hand, communication is a thought out process. Storytelling needs to be done.
Yeah.
Does it conflict at times? Like you have pressures and deadlines, and then a message still needs to be correct. In communication, the thing is that you need to be as close to 100% correct as possible, because that's going out. Does that put pressure on the team? Like, how is that?
Yes, I mean, there are moments when it'll be like, we want you to communicate that. You're like, oh, I don't think we should communicate that. And you get a healthy tension. So I think that's totally the case. I've always held a very tight ship, in the sense that I fundamentally believe in consistency and in honesty in your communications. And it's okay if something, if there is, you can always, I believe in, and I've done that from day one pretty much, is that you can also correct and move on and show progression. And I think that is because it's certainly, I mean, storytelling is in many facets, but if you look at the kind of earned part, so the PR part, from day one, and my team have had a very hands-on approach. We believe in, certainly in a new business, like a lot of startups are, you need to educate your target audience. You have to educate them. And that's not only by putting your own brand forward, it's actually educating journalists, key stakeholders, so that they actually get to understand and that takes time and investment. On a good day, it's good. On a bad day, well, maybe you get some more critique, but at least you can probably steer the discussion. So I would strongly advise startups, don't be afraid to stand up for what you stand for. Obviously factually it's got to be correct, but I always say, if you're not at the table, you can't influence the discussion. And and you do see some companies that it's like, okay, if you want to contact them in media or journal, I have my phone number on the website. It's like, okay, put in a web form and maybe they contact you. And I think we've kind of really vested in that from day one. And I think that does pay off over time. So I would strongly advise that. And again, if you can, it can be in form of background talks, and it can be in form of symposiums, and it's worth investing it. And of course, on the whole branding marketing side, and that's been less of mine, that's more in our growth business unit and in marketing. where you have, your whole paid and search engine optimization, you have all that. Of course, that is hugely important, but I would say equally, it is important to get understanding goodwill with key stakeholders, journalists, activists, politicians, and this is a new world, and you need to update them and repeat. I always say it takes. Negative news will travel, as we know. Positive news, probably have to repeat it at least 10 times before it sticks once. So I think that's in your storytelling, create a very structured plan with, proactively, we're going to communicate A, B, C, D at all times. Is it social media? Is it blog? Is it media, journalists? And repeat it. And over time, you will get traction. Don't give up on it, because, and then you will be able to appeal to more investors, to more growth, for more funding. And so start your storytelling the moment you feel that you have enough beef to the bone on your own company. That's what I would advise. And then this will fall into place.
Very good points. And I have so many notes getting ready for questioning. So let's pick up something which you touched upon, like the concept of educating. And when you said it's education of journalists and key stakeholders, it's how you put your phone out there. Now you have extensive experience in PR and communication. When do you think a startup is ready to have that external level contact or journalists? Like, where in the bigger storytelling picture does PR come in? Does structured relationship building with stakeholders? And if the startup is in, let's say, space where even political influences, like, when does that start kicking in? Or should founders just let it naturally come to the startup?
I think I wouldn't let it naturally come. I think that's a wee bit dangerous. I would kind of, when I studied PR back in 91, 92, my lecturer there said PR was programmed response, and that always stuck with me. So I would say, when is the startup ready? It depends obviously on the founders. Some are more pro to, some are more charismatic or are prone to naturally storytell. But I would say the moment you have a viable enough product and you realize the market is there, that is when you would start your story. It needs to be good enough. Obviously, I always say you also get one bite at the apple. You need to start when it's good enough, and then you get traction. Yes, you update it, you improve it.
Okay.
But I think you can already spark inspiration for your solution very early on, and keep it, so have your, then you going to kind of theoretical stuff now, but you'd have your vision ready, you have your key message doc, your Q&As, what if, outside in perspective, and then keep that as your base and start on your own LinkedIn, start to do your storytelling. And one important element is facts, figures from the outside world. Where's their relevance? Because if you just say, oh, I've got the best solution, but where's the pain point? You're solving a pain point, aren't you? Or highlight that pain point, and then you bring your solution. Don't come with your solution first, because it will fall on deaf ears. So, and start to build yourself up as a bit more of an expert, because the chances are you know more than other people in your own solution.
Okay. Again, a lot of useful information. I'll try to summarize it for our audience here, because you made a very clear distinction, because startups are creating solutions, but solution taking creates time. So you talked about an alternative over there. You said focus on inspiration till you have a solution. So I think that's a great message for startups who don't have a finished solution, or who think that solution is still not finished, to focus on the inspiration side. And there you added 2 points, which was used facts and figures which are outside, and focus on the pain points. I think that's brilliant advice for startups. So if you don't have a solution yet, go to the inspiration side and build your story around facts, figures, and the pain that you are trying to relieve in the market. Very solid point. Kristina, I have a point here, like in an early stage startup, or even if, let's say, the startup has initial solution out and it starts going out to journalists and starts building its story, does the startup need to have the same storyteller? Who needs to be the storyteller in the startup? So because maybe the founder himself or herself, or however they are, don't want to, be
correct.
in that? Like, how do we
Mm.
resolve that challenge?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think you can never put a square peg in a round hole. It's just not going to work. Then really is how do you define that? I would say, depending on the size of your, if there are 5 or 10 of you, I would say first is build your vision, your key message, your structure, and then maybe you chop and dice it into subject matter. So maybe have a more technical spokesperson, maybe a more financial spokesperson, maybe a more inspirational. That might be a way to do that. But I would say at the end of the day, you wouldn't, if you don't have a passionate spokesperson in your company, then maybe you need to rethink on the group of people that you've got, because at the end of the day, I'm sure there is somebody in there. It doesn't have to by default be the CEO, it could be another founder, or it could also be a passionate person who has a slightly different take and by default can park the product in there. I would be a bit hesitant to go, and I know, but then that is rather costly. But of course, the whole influence marketing thing is huge these days too. But then that's also rather costly. You can always get somebody else to do the talking for you. But I think in the startup world, you ought to be able to speak about it yourself and be passionate about it, because that's where authenticity lies. And I think authenticity is an elementary word in everything. And if you don't have authenticity, it will land on deaf ears as well. And showing a human side and talking about the why. Why should we care about your company, your solution? If you can't explain it to your grandma, then you're doing it wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to explore the surface a little bit more. So we'll go down the onion a little bit more. So let's say there's a founding team in a startup. If we take examples of big brands, eventually every brand is kind of shredded down to the leader who is running. So when we talked about Tesla, for example, Elon Musk tweets and all that comes out. And then we have Amazon, and then we talk about space travel and all the great work at times Amazon. So eventually it comes down to a key leader or a key figure in a startup. Do you think it's advisable for startup founders when you're building your startup? As founders, you need to go through a structured approach to get yourself trained into the way you'll be running brands, or do you think startup founders can learn it on their way?
I'd say a bit of both, actually.
Okay.
I think it is elementary that they have it in them. If they don't have it in them naturally, find a way of, understanding how to do it. And there are, online courses, etc., on how to position yourself, really, because it's that kind of, your personal brand is important as a startup as well as the company brand, of course. So I think, and the most successful ones at the end of the day, normally it's about focus. Don't change. You can't be passionate about everything. You can't water everything down. Be bold and stick to your guns on what your passion is,
Okay.
It's clear with Elon Musk and how he wants to make space available for everybody, and that's he's going back on that all the time. And I think with your voice, creating cities for living, every time we'll go back to that. That was the case for day one. What is it for you in your startup? And then that's the kind of the red thread at all times. Yeah.
Great. So I think I heard the word vision when you were saying there, and when you started your presentation, the slides as well, you had a very clear vision about, if I go back, it was cities made for living and free from noise and
pollution.
It kind of sticks in the mind.
Yeah.
How do you achieve that level of clarity as a startup? So because startups are rewriting their pitch decks all the time. The first slide is always where the team stops, like 1 hour. They're thinking, like, what do we say in the first slide where we need to write them? How do you achieve that level of clarity?
I think it's sitting down and doing the whole kind of wordsmithing exercise. Less is more. It's very good to come up with a whole page of why, but then try and boil that down. And that's just not as simple, but that is an exercise to do. And again, where's your acid test? Will it stick with your grandma or with your mum or your father or your grandfather, whatever? But it's that kind of element of, and maybe there's several processes in that to kind of get there. And it's also kind of in the naming of your company. I mean, I wasn't there when it was named. I joined a few months later, but as I've understood it, it was the French voyage, to travel. And then, in Sweden, it's voyage, voy technology, because how technology can enable people to travel. So again, a simple word, voy, also sticks and resonates. So that kind of also is important in your branding, that you don't get kind of too long or technical or complex word. But again, that's maybe take the time to maybe have a workshop with your founders or with your company on, okay, naming company, vision of company, structure, key messages. It's worth investing that now at the beginning, because that, as I said at the beginning, that's your base. Yeah.
So from what I hear, you're saying a name cannot be an afterthought in startup building.
Shouldn't be.
Okay.
It should be basically it's what you hang your hat on. That is your entry ticket, your visit, or your business card, isn't it? It's not saying you do it in isolation with building a product or your service or your solution, but you kind of should go a little bit hand in hand. And I think if you give it a little bit more love and care, you'll have the impact that you want with it.
Yeah. And with Voy, I think what really sticks in my mind is the close to, I don't know if it's not orange, but it's close. It's a shade between,
coral. We call it coral color.
Okay, so this the color sticks very strongly in my mind, and I think the second thing that sticks to my mind is that it's only 3 letters. So the V sticks out. Not many brands begin with a V and then OI like. So it's visualization of the brand as well. So the brand name is Y. So you just say it out, and then it sticks.
And we've always had from day one this idea to be friendly and approachable and accessible. So that's kind of the colors tie into that. And then, over time it's evolved a little. It's only been 3 years, but we kind of want to be the friendly, approachable brand. For us, that's important.
Very interesting. And from the vision, you started also talking about a big thing, which is like the 15 minutes city, like which is a big thing in the space. It's not only Voy, it's a broad vision for the future for how cities are structured. So how do you find something to connect like that in your startup idea? So I think that's
important. That's part of strategy, isn't it? And part of relevance. And again, commitment into, we alone, or one alone as a company can't do it. You need to find your allies and people that sit in the same space that want a similar thing. So that was kind of a process on that. And our turf, is a city. That's where we belong. And the 50-minute started out there in Paris. So that kind of had a natural fit also there for us. And so then it was really like we tried out, we work, and it really resonates in that sense that we work with other, it will also help us to connect our different partners as well. So we want that, we're not just a scooter company in it there to make some rides and then see. We're much more. We see ourselves as that enabler, and hopefully in 10, 20 years you look back and say that was a tipping point for cities. Cities are now still built around cars from 1950. True. And let's rethink and be creative. And I think that's the beauty of technology. It can enable so incredibly much. Whereas you might think transport, dull, dusty, cars, motorbikes. And in fact, now we put, technology in. Well, we put a new mode of transport on the street, but it's not just a separate scooter. It has an IoT. It has a back end. We can do speed zones. We're kind of reimagining that with the whole GPS aspect. And I think that then hopefully it's also the shared economy that people maybe then the penny drops that, well, I don't need to buy a scooter. I don't need to buy a scooter. I don't need to buy a bike. I don't need to buy a car. I don't need to buy a house maybe at times. If we all share, then, and this is it's the top of the micro-mobility stack, but it's a way to kind of go, maybe I'll give it a try. And that's step one, isn't it? And I think if you find that in your solutions, you've got whatever the solution might be, there'll be people that sit close to you maybe they're your allies, and then together you create that kind of momentum and shift. And it takes time to change behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Couple of points coming from there. So startups usually get stuck a lot in, okay, no, I am a business facing startup. Oh, business is where we are making money. We are actually serving the consumer side, which is there due to the business side. Do you think you have some questions like that? Is Voy a hardware driven company or a software driven company, a community, a platform, an enable, an IoT company? Like how does that fluff or cloud make sense inside?
I mean, clearly we have a fleet on the street, but it's more than a fleet. We have our own IoT connecting it. We have several hundred engineers working on that. So, but I would say we see ourselves as a community and an enabler in that, and we have the fleet and the hardware and the software connect, but you can't have one without the other. And that's also when you start to get the brilliance to happen. And clearly you have the app here, we have the community. So I think that all comes together.
Okay.
Yeah.
So community and enabler, as you said, and then hardware comes in as an enabler, and community is your power, those 6 million people out there. Brilliant. And we also started talking about when we touched on the subject of 15-minute city, like how does that change your competition? So do you see your competition more as other micro-mobility players, or generally the space, like not competition? Because we always have the discussion in marketing or communication that is it the competition or is it the alternatives you can use? Because your alternative for Voy could be a car, as you are saying. And then cars are getting pushed out due to the pressure from the consumers who are eventually using them. The same car consumer might be pushing the car out of the neighborhood. No, it's not needed. So where do you see your competition? Is it the space itself, the micro mobility space, or the brands over there, or is it larger category?
That's a very valid question, and I think that depends on the phase of where we are as a company. And I would say to that point, part of it is the regulation, because it's new and the biggest competitive space. We need to be allocated relevant space, and then you're into your, cars and city centres take space. And we're not opposed to cars on safe, but if you actually critical look at all the requirements a car in that has when it's parked, not used for 90% of the time, you could put 12 e-scooters in that, for example, and the CO2 emissions. And then if you go back to those renderings, I think that's part of the equation. But of course, you can't have clutter. But then you also need to be given space, and we have technology solutions, like we have end of ride. So you have all that whole space. Plus, of course, you have our own competitors. You've got all the other e-scooter companies as well. So that's part of it. But I think it's really more at this phase that we're in, is that we get the right kind of regulation so that we have the right allocated space that people can continue to use. And then we really are at the tip of the iceberg, because people are using us already, not under not ideal conditions. So if we get the conditions better, it will snowball even more. Yeah.
Interesting. You started talking about a very interesting point over there, which was regulation. And usually the regulations it takes time, because it goes through a process of, and then there is a regulation that comes out after an X number of years, once a disruption has already happened. What do you think, what are innovative players like you in the market, like what are their challenges or what are their struggles when it comes to regulation? Like how would you want that side to be changed? What's your ambition? And we have this discussion when we had the model of those Uber and Airbnbs coming in, then the regulations were not in place, and suddenly you could do things in a different way.
Correct.
What would be your wish list on regulation side?
I mean, I think that, as you say, it's unfortunately it takes a long time for regulation to catch up with disruptive technology. And so what's our timeline in this? I mean, ultimately, from day one, we have as a company different. Now, most are doing, we differentiated ourselves that we've had no rogue launches. We would work from day one with the city.
Mhm.
Now it's kind of following suit. As I already said at the beginning, we re-won our Marseille tender. So what we want is we want sustainable micromobility on all fronts. And
Mhm.
of course, we want to have competition. Every industry needs competition, but we want regulation whereby the city can have demands on their e-scooter companies or
Mhm.
e-bikes. We
Mhm.
also do
Mhm.
e-bikes, and that also the public and riders understand, this mode of transport. What is it? Is it a bike or is it this? And again, every country has different regulation. I think when you have that, plus hopefully by the more space that we get, we'll have better infrastructure. So there's more space for people to scoot, for people to bike. So I think regulation is the way to go on that, but it cannot be knee-jerk regulation that
Exactly.
people think, okay, well, let's just not do this now, get rid of a so-called temporary blip, and then we'll see. I mean, micromobility, if you look at the demand there, it's here to stay, but clearly we need to kind of find a way that it is harmonized and institutionalized for everybody. And I think that's the kind of road that we're embarking on at the moment. And in the UK, we have 18 cities, and we have exclusive deals with the cities there.
Mhm.
If you go to
Mhm.
Cambridge, Bristol, Bath, Portsmouth, Liverpool, you'll only see Voi.
Okay.
And we work very closely, and sometimes we have parking racks, mandatory parking. We have, and then if you go to France, we have tenders. We have Marseille there. It's us together with two other operators. Sweden is trying to sort out its regulation. So I think in that way that it's that we are very vocal what we would like, and then it's also that collaborative approach to
Mm.
together to make it work.
Okay. Very interesting point. And I was taking this, like, for example, when a new technology comes in, there is innovation out there. So innovation or a solution has been created, but that needs to thrive on a predated infrastructure. In this case, this is the vision is a 15-minute city with all those changes, but currently the infrastructure is at a ground zero or one
Yeah,
right
yeah,
now. Well, it needs to evolve to a 4 or 5 level
yeah.
for this to. So there is innovation up there, but the infrastructure has not caught up. So
Mm.
so the knee-jerk reaction, as you said, would be to regulate back the technology to fit
Yes,
this current
yeah,
level of infrastructure.
correct.
Now, so that will be a pressure, and there'll be a tremendous pressure as an industry. It's not only Voi, it'll be several players
Yeah,
in there. How do you enable the user side there? Like, how can they become more educated? And I'll go back to the word educated, so
yeah,
that the usage of technology can be more responsible. The parking is more responsible.
yeah,
How do we
yeah.
enable that?
Yeah, and I think that's how we enable with our users. Is like we have obviously the app, we
Mm-hmm.
educate there. What we've done now, we started it in Sweden on Monday, is educating on good parking. So our users, they need to know what is good parking. So now when you end your ride with Voi, you need to take a picture of where you parked the Voi, and we
Mm-hmm.
validate it later on. So that's one way of improving our users' behavior and using
Okay.
technology and branding to do that. We also, actually 2 years ago, we had the only online traffic school.
Okay.
We asked our users to complete the ride like Voila. So that's also, because it's not just how to scoot, it's also how to scoot among other road users. What do you do
Okay.
when you get to a crossroad? That's how you educate users.
Mm-hmm.
And also incentivize good behavior by giving away free rides. So
Okay.
we are doing that. So that's evolving more and more, because that is a very important building block in
Hmm.
all. Absolutely.
Okay, interesting. I think we have some questions coming up, but we can stretch our discussion on 2 or 3 important points, which I kind of made when we were doing this. We, in some part of earlier discussion, talked about Corona being there and it impacting the micro mobility industry at a level, and of course, all other transportation services at a larger level as well, in the cars and all. So that's something, that's an externality that just came into a
Yeah.
business model, and then you had to respond, and then that has its business implication. But there could also be crisis at times which can come on the brand. How do you, as a communicator, communication expert,
Mm.
and a PR expert, see that
Mm.
how should brands respond to if there is something which goes completely off the plan and you're stuck with it and have to respond to it next
Yeah.
morning?
I
Like
think that,
what
yeah.
preparation, like if you can give us some like.
Yes, absolutely. And I've been through my fair deal of crisis the last 25 years. And I think my main thing is be very quick with the facts and slow with the opinions. Get your facts
Okay.
there and then. And it's very old fashioned, but it works every time in the sense of the moment an issue occurs, put a logbook together and put down your facts, because trust me, when it gets heated, there's a lot happening. People will then all think, oh, was that a fact? No, that's an opinion. And then you have not got your timeline anymore. Stick to a log, because you will be very thankful of that as the story develops, and have a clear process in place. But then also, again, stand for something. You don't need to hide away from it. But again, if your facts are correct, then you can act accordingly and communicate accordingly and take action where needed. So it's that part of the discipline, but don't duck, because my experience is going to come anyway. You might as well do it, but be prepared, and always based on the facts. Because as you say, if you do a lot of proactive storytelling, the flip side is, but your brand is visible. Well, then they will, on a bad day, want to know, should things not go well, what are you doing about it? I think that's important to have that kind of discipline as well.
So you think the brand should think through, let's say, the complete list of 10 to 15 scenarios that can go wrong with it?
Yes.
Does that preparation help?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And do kind of, some fire drills on it, because practice makes perfect. And when you're in the stress of the moment, that's when your memory muscle will kick in. And if you practice, then the chances are you won't be dazed.
Okay. And then if we take, like if we see the corporate world around us, or the big companies or startups which have evolved to scale up stages, when a crisis happens, who should be the key responder? Does it have to be, like, it goes back to our discussion on who is driving the startup storytelling, like who is the authentic figure there? Does it have to be the owner, or
I mean, it depends on the level. And of course, the CEO is an important part of the puzzle, but not all roads should have to lead to the CEO. Again, if you're a scale up, it has to be, you need to appoint the relevant person for the subject matter, and depending on the crisis. So should a crisis be on, I don't know, safety or data breach, or then you might use a subject matter expert on that. Be careful. I mean, I noticed in Sweden that was different to when I worked in Holland a lot. A lot of, when you look on television, when companies are being interviewed on crisis, and that often it would be the comms person and doing the typical blah blah blah, I would say. And I never understood that. Whereas in the Netherlands, often you have the subject matter expert speaking, being prepped by the comms person. So again, it depends on the personalities you have, but preparation is key. But be mindful of your exec team, because you don't want their reputation tainted too much. Doesn't mean to say that, of course, ultimately they have to be reliable and responsible, but I wouldn't always put them forward.
Okay.
At first instance.
Very good points. I'll try to summarize it here. So what Kristina is saying, and for crisis management, the first thing is to have preparation. In fact, one thing before that, which you started, was focus on facts and less on opinions. So facts versus opinion, go on the fact side. Prep yourself for possible scenarios that can run south with your startup. And third is to leave it to subject matter experts as much as possible, because then it brings more authenticity. So three very strong strong bits of insights from Kristina on if the crisis hits your brand. We move to questions. I'm just thinking if I left out something here. I really had a question, because Voi grew very fast. So I just wanted to know how different cultures, like being in different countries very quickly, how does the brand feel about it? Does it put pressure on communication, like story being like language difference versus cultural difference between countries? Does that come into play in a startup when it's growing so fast?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it depends on, like, if I can talk about Voy with the comms. I mean, with my background, I had the European angle already, certainly on my experience in Germany, France, etc. So it is important to be relevant and to tailor your message accordingly at all times. So if you're relevant, you'll have a high attraction. So I think that is very important. So have that, I would say, wiggle room in your brand. So you can never force it down people's throat. But on the other hand, I think we're more similar than different as well. So you do have a kind of baseline in that.
Okay, great. Vinod, if we have a few questions, we can take them now, and then we can avrunda or have a, go ahead, please.
Okay, perfect. Kristina, thank you for that. That was very insightful. So straight off the top, a very fundamental question. Product companies tend to use the words product and brand quite synonymously. Would you suggest they differentiate the two, and how would you suggest they manage it?
Oh, I mean, I'd say you're back to the age-old question: are you a product or a service or a solution? What's the difference? I mean, I think ultimately your brand is the most elementary thing, and your products might change over time. Our services as you evolve. So I would say focus on your brand, on what are you trying to achieve. And then of course your product is an important leg on that, but it shouldn't be the other way around. So that's how I would do it. But then I am more of a brand communications person, but I think there you get more relevance, and it'll give you a little bit more freedom to adjust your solutions because your brand is leading it. But otherwise, if you're only on one specific product, if you go too deep into that, but then that product's no longer relevant, then you've exposed yourself too much. So, yeah.
Okay. So building off that, but with a slightly different angle, to satisfy new wants and needs, can changing a brand's vision be beneficial or potentially too risky?
Again, you have to focus, and how do you navigate through that? So I would try at all times to stick with your vision and adapt the product solutions accordingly. Because I don't think you can't have conflicting products or solutions, because it is about authenticity. Things can evolve, but you can't be going from one area to the other and chopping, because that creates confusion. And I think if people are confused, they don't trust anymore. I think that's a very important part in your storytelling. It's about trust and consistency. If you don't have that, then you create confusion and chaos, and people get worried, and then they drop you. Then it's like, oh, so yeah.
Okay. That leads me very nicely to the next question, which Matt's asked. So this is more in the B2B space, and this picks up on a point which you made, saying when you're explaining your company or explaining your idea, keep it simple so that your grandmother could understand it, right? But if you took complex B2B solutions, how should your communication be structured? Because you would have customers who understand it, but there is still the wider communication that you need to do, and hopefully you need to keep it as layman as possible.
Correct.
So what's the approach you would suggest there?
Yeah, that's mapping it out and doing a stakeholder analysis and mapping your message to fit the different stakeholders, but your baseline is the same. So then for those that do understand, say, for example, it's a highly technical solution, then for your vertical stakeholder mapping, so experts or those customers that do know about it, somebody knocking on the door, just nearly, it was 1 o'clock, you see, I'm being booted out. They would then, you need to be relevant to your target audience. So there you can go in depth and make it more complex, but keep the main message the same. And then you dive into, and I need to leave my room.
Yeah, brilliant. Great meeting. Kristina, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for the community. We'll reach out with the video link to everyone in the larger community. Thank you. Have a nice Friday. Take care.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.